Welcome back to the channel. Some years ago, almost 10 years ago, I hosted a podcast called SCIFI on Screen. The podcast lasted about 5+ years, and I gently closed it down in order to transition into a YouTube channel talking more about books and movies. But I reviewed films one at a time, sometimes compared originals to remakes, sometimes I did special shows. But a lot of the criticisms and a lot of the critiques and analysis that I did for these films, I stand by. And so I thought, since I've done over about 100 shows, that I would share the archives with my new audience here on my YouTube channel. The shows range from about 45 minutes or so more of a podcast. I'll just put up a static image of the old logo, and you can listen and enjoy. I'm going to do these weekly, and hope you enjoy. Welcome to Sci-Fi on Screen. I'm your host, Jeff Palermo. And this week, I'm going to be taking a look at Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I originally had some other podcasts lined up, but Leonard Nimoy died last week, and kind of wanted to honor his passing by getting in the second of the Trek films. I'm eventually going to be covering all of them, and I thought I would just move up in the schedule. Wrath of Khan, since it's probably the best one done to date. I happen to be up to it anyway, honoring Leonard Nimoy and his contribution to my childhood and my imaginative life, as it were. Covered Star Trek the Motion Picture in a previous podcast. You can find it on my website, sci-fionscreen.com. There's a sort of index page, and you can find it under Star Trek the Motion Picture. So it's on to Wrath of Khan. There's some interesting background that I thought I would cover. Obviously, this is a time-hallowed sci-fi film. So again, I'm going to be trying to find some information that maybe some folks haven't heard. And in the film itself, I'm going to take a very personal look at it and just kind of talk about why I still love it to this date. After the first Trek film, I guess Paramount, Roddenberry wrote a sequel. So the sequel he wrote, the plot was the crew of the Enterprise travels back in time to set right a corrupted timeline after the Klingons used the Guardian of Forever to prevent the assassination of JFK. I mean, sounds like an episode to me. So they basically forced him out of the process. I mean, he's the creator, right? Paramount basically said, we're not going your way a second time, which must have killed him. I mean, could you imagine? So they turned to a guy named Harv Bennett, who was basically a television executive who had never seen an episode of the original series. So he took it on and he immersed himself in all of the original series episodes, watched them all, kind of really threw himself into it, which is kind of cool. And then he wrote a story treatment. His treatment was called War of the Generations. And this is all on Wikipedia, by the way. So Kirk investigates a rebellion on a distant world and discovers that his son is the leader of the rebels. Khan is the mastermind behind the plot, and Kirk and Son join forces to defeat the tyrant. Bennett then hired a scriptwriter named Jack Sowards, a big Star Trek fan, to turn the outline into a filmable script. Sowards wrote the script before a writer's strike in '81. His draft, called The Omega Syndrome, involved the theft of the Federation's ultimate weapon, the, quote, Omega system. The screenwriter was concerned that the weapon was much too negative for Star Trek, that Bennett wanted something more uplifting. So it was suggested to Bennett that the device be turned into a terraforming tool instead. So in recognition of the biblical power of the weapon, they changed it, instead of the Omega system, to the Genesis device. So that's kind of cool. And then director Nicholas Meyer was approached to direct and to kind of rewrite the script. I guess they weren't even super happy with the script that they had. He, as well, had never seen an episode of Star Trek when approached to direct the film and rewrite the script, which... crazy how, Khan was gotten so right by two guys who'd never, watched Trek in its original form. And Meyer, it's interesting, he was a novelist. He had written novels about Sherlock Holmes. So he'd written some pastiches about Holmes. And one of them was turned into a film called The 7% Solution, starring Nicole Williamson as Holmes. So I think Meyer did not direct that, but he wrote the script. And then he directed a film called Time After Time, in which H.G. Wells chases Jack the Ripper through time to modern day, at that time in the 70s, San Francisco. He also directed a terrific film called The Day After for television. So Meyer described his script as Hornblower in Outer Space, and he put in a lot of nautical references. I'm assuming he put in the Moby Dick Tale of Two Cities references. but, he wanted a bit of a swashbuckle to it. Roddenberry at that point disagreed with everything. He hated the naval texture. He didn't like Khan's Ahab's undertones, but he was pretty much ignored and marginalized. And although I have mad respect for Roddenberry, as we have seen with Star Wars, sometimes the creator needs to be thrown out of the room in order to get the thing right. That's a bit of the background. Let's jump in to Wrath of Khan. Immediately, what is noticed is that the Next Generation theme that was used for the first film is gone, and we kick right off into the Alexander Courage theme music from the TV show, which then quickly moves musically into this new James Horner written theme music, which follows the original series all the way through till, I believe, the 6th, 7th one. James Horner was a fairly young and untested composer, and they had heard some things that he had composed and really liked him, and so jumped on board. And I think he's a real integral part of why this film works as well as it does in many ways. So there you have it. So we get the credits with the music, title cards and the cast and all that. And then as soon as the credits are finished, we get one title card, and it's called In the 23rd Century. We now are on the Enterprise bridge, or so we believe, of course, that is being helmed by a Vulcan named Lieutenant Saavik, played by Kirstie Alley. And the bridge is filled with the rest of the original series crew that we know and love. Uhura, Sulu, Spock. Chekhov is noticeably absent. And we're in the midst of the Kobayashi Maru test. We also have new uniforms. They're a far cry improvement over the 70s kind of Logan's Run-ish unitards of the first film, which I didn't think were very good at all. A lot of people didn't like them. So the uniforms are really cool. Really, they look great. So you have our, Kobayashi Maru test, right? There's a freighter of some kind inside the neutral zone that, the distress call, and the question for the commander is whether or not they will wander into the neutral zone to rescue them and be in violation of treaty, which, the computer turns into a no-win scenario no matter how you try to beat the thing. The graphics on the screen are a little dated, but they serve their purpose. And what's always kind of weirded me out about this is that when they depict the neutral zone, it's projected on the view screen as like an egg-shaped area of space. It looks like kind of an ellipse. It's weird. It doesn't make any sense to me. I always assume that the neutral zone it's basically there. These are boundaries in the sector that separates Romulans and the Klingons and Federation. So they project it as a weird kind of bubble. I don't know. Maybe there's more to it than that. But I didn't really do any research. But I've always found it very odd. Anyway, Saavik enters the zone, and of course, as soon as she enters, the signal is lost because it was fake. And there are 3 Klingons projected on the screen. I think they're the same Katinga-class ships we saw in the first film. The Enterprise has no escape. She's blown to bits. And the test, because, they want to trick you in the first bit of this movie, it's fairly realistic. When the torpedoes supposedly hit the Enterprise, there's explosions on, in the bridge, which I don't know that would actually be, they would do that, at an academy. They would have explosions on the bridge for realism. But, it's done for the audience. So we're like, so we don't know exactly whether it's real or not. So there you have it. It's over. We see all the crew members die from the explosions. We're like, what the hell's going on? But it's all a test. They're at Starfleet Command back on Earth. And Kirk, walking through, it's like a halo of white light, enters holding an old book. And Shatner looks really good in this film. He definitely, from his own memoirs, he tends to bloat up in between movies. And then when, the call comes, the shooting date starts, he goes on like these crazy diets and drops all this weight, and so he can get into his uniform. And he looks good. He looks like in shape, very fit, very commanding. He addresses Spock as captain, which, the brief time when Spock is not commander, when he's actually a captain, which also signals to us that Spock is in command of Enterprise and Jim's still sort of an earthbound admiral as we found him in the first film. Kirk's it's weird because he jokes with McCoy. McCoy, he's lying on the ground, feigning death. Kirk kind of starts to jibe with him like, "Doctor, heal thyself." McCoy, goes along with it. He's like, "What do you think of my performance?" And all of a sudden, Kirk just flips. He's like, "I'm not a drama critic," and walks on. I've always found it a weird beat in Wrath of Khan. He starts off kind of jokey, kind of ends by kind of, with McCoy in that way. It's just kind of odd. So now we get a brief dialogue between Saavik and Kirk. Saavik doesn't think it's a fair test of her command abilities. And, it's a setup for Kirk's arc in this film, which is a blessed relief from the last film where no one had any arcs, really, already beginning with Kirk. He's kind of cranky on the bridge, and he's telling Saavik, the quote is, how we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life, which will come around near the end of the film. And obviously, this gets right at one of Kirk's main deals, which is that, he believes he always can outwit death, that no matter what happens, he'll come up with some trick. And he himself will admit this later in the film, which is I love. So we're setting up his theme, which we'll set up a little bit more too before the actual plot of the film gets rolling. And he looks very terse and tense. At one point when this is over, he's asked, why not just put an experienced crew in the Enterprise? Why bother, this whole group of trainees? And his exit line is, galloping around the cosmos is a game for the young doctor. So that's where Kirk is. Still on the ship, we get a great scene now between Kirk and Spock. Just oceans of charisma between the two of them. Spock's waiting for Kirk's review of his cadets, and Kirk's kind of ribbing him about it. I assume you're loitering around here, and so on and so forth. It's really good. We get a tease to Kirk's unique solution to the test himself, and Spock says, your solution was, shall we say, unique. And Kirk's answer is, it had the novelty of never being tried. And we find out that it's Kirk's birthday, and Spock has given him the Charles Dickens novel A Tale of Two Cities, and a beautiful-looking bound edition that I was excited to see. Kirk reads the opening lines. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Message Spock. And again, it's a thematic marker for this film for Kirk's journey, because Spock is going to take the Sidney Carton role in Tale of Two Cities before this is all over. Spock heads back to the Enterprise to prepare for inspection. Jim will be there in a few days to inspect the Enterprise before it heads out on a training cruise, but he heads back to his house in good old San Fran. So now you have a scene between McCoy and Kirk. And Kirk's place is pretty cool. It's got a great view. There's lots of nautical-themed items on the wall, barometers, and there's old weapons, and there's a set of dueling pistols nearby. It's very cool. It makes sense that this is Kirk's place. So McCoy arrives to celebrate Kirk's birthday, and he's got a bottle of Romulan ale with him. Another little item. The other item is reading glasses, and so we hear that Kirk is allergic to something called Retinax 5, which evidently cures all optical degradation in the 23rd century. I would like some now, if that's possible. But Kirk is miserable. He thanks Bones for the glasses, but he's just in a rotten mood, and these are old friends, right? So Bones completely calls him on it. It's like, birthday's supposed to be a celebration. Why are we treating it as like a funeral? Bones, I don't want to be lectured. They're so comfortable together as actors and as characters, you're really in the saddle in this film very early on. And there's some wonderful back and forth between them that ends with McCoy quoting, quote, Jim, I'm your doctor and I'm your friend. Get back your command. Get it back before you turn into part of this collection, before you really do grow old. What a great setup, right? Think about the last film with V'ger and, Kirk arriving on the bridge. This film, the theme of the film has been laid out. It centers around Kirk. We're also centered in the main character triangle in the Trek world, which is, Spock, McCoy, and Kirk. So we get a scene with Spock and Kirk. We get a scene with McCoy and Kirk. There's some humor, but the theme is there, and we're based primarily in character now, unlike the first film. And again, I think this film succeeds primarily, it's a clever story, right? But because there's a real journey that Kirk takes on this film. They deal with the fact that he's old, so they're dealing with his age, first of all, which I like because it's real. And, they're dealing with it uniquely through his experience and his two best friends. So it's great. It's already we're in such good hands from two guys who, prior to the years before they came up with this story, had never seen an episode of Trek. So pretty impressive. So now we shift over to the USS Reliant, which is on a scouting mission. For me, in the Trek universe, it's always cool to see a new ship configuration. There's a lot of different configurations by using sort of the nacelles, the saucer section, the main hull, and how many different ways you can put these together to make new ships. And for the Reliant, they remove the main hull and the sort of the neck piece that connects the two, and sort of the nacelles are attached kind of right to the saucer because it's kind of a scout ship, but it's a lovely looking ship. It's got really cool lines.
So again, there's a nice cool factor here where, in the first film, we saw 3 Klingon ships that we kind of knew before, briefly in the beginning, and then they were gone. And then we just saw the Enterprise through the whole thing. We're getting a little bit of the Federation in the sense that, they're part of a fleet, and it's not just them in this universe. We see Chekhov, the only crew member that we haven't seen so far, narrating the ship's log, and they're approaching a planet they call SETI Alpha 6. And we hear that they're scouting for Project Genesis and that they're looking for a completely lifeless planet so they can perform some kind of experiment, or at least clear it for an experiment. We see the captain of the Reliant by the name of Terrell, played by veteran character actor Paul Winfield. Very cool. And they discover what they think is like this tiny little bit of matter down on the planet. They call it preanimate particle of matter, and they're talking about something like, well, maybe we can transplant it. And then Chekhov gets this great line where he's like, you know what she'll say. And so we cut to who she is. We cut to Space Station Regular 1, which kind of looks like a mini starbase, the way it's set up. It's kind of cool looking. Another principal in this film, Dr. Carol Marcus, played by an actor named Bibi Besh, who's, I'll get to this a little bit later, she's a terrific character, and a terrific female character, frankly. I'm going to approach this from kind of 2 angles with her. Completely believable as head of this research group that's, taking up residence on Regular 1. And watching it this time, I had paused it to make notes, and I saw it as part of the uniforms that these scientists wear. The badges look like the inside of iPods. They have these it's weird. They're like iPods on their side with a little track wheel. And I don't know, it was kind of startling and goofy looking in one way, but like kind of cool. So we get a brief scene between Carol and her son, David Marcus, played by an actor named Merritt Butrick. David is really worried about dealings with Starfleet. He thinks they're all militaristic. But Carol Marcus is, a staunch supporter. David teases her about, like, an ex-boyfriend. Remember that overgrown Boy Scout you used to go out with? And Carol retorts very seriously, Jim Kirk was many things, but he was never a Boy Scout. So it's kind of cool. So now we cut back to SETI Alpha 6. Terrell and Chekhov beam down to the surface, continuing the bizarre Starfleet practice of the captain of the ship always beaming to the away missions. Always found it funny. Like, only in TV naval fleets do captains of ships beam down, to away missions. It's very funny. They beam down in the middle of a sandstorm, and Chekhov's like, the tricorder must be broken. But they discover a set of cargo carriers. They enter. The set is great inside, old pots and pans. We see an old chessboard. Everything looks very old and very worn, dated. It's really cool. And they both look at some tank. There's some creature undulating below the dirt. Of course, we will meet them very soon. And then Chekhov comes across this buckle. It says SS Botany Bay. He suddenly kind of freaks out. Now, of course, as we all know, Chekhov was not yet a member of the crew during the season that Space Seed had aired. So Chekhov was not in the episode. So there's 2 gaffes in this. This is the first one where he could have heard of the mission and known about it. So technically, right now, they're not completely in violation of like continuity, right? Because Chekhov maybe read up on the missions before he came on board and, knew about the Khan incident, whatever. So anyway, he freaks out and Terrell doesn't know what's going on, but Chekhov says, just shut up and let's get out of here. But of course, they run out and they're surrounded by a group of figures. And now this is great slow reveal of Khan, they're all inside the bulkheads, and all of a sudden, the camera we focus on a figure taking off his gloves 1 finger at a time. Then he slowly removes the wrappings on below the lower half of the face. And then he removes sort of the metal upper half, which is sort of a mask, and the wrappings. And the soundtrack slowly rises. Horner is great here. As Khan's removing all of his garments, the soundtrack rises up. It's like a winding sound. Once he finally takes off his everything, we hear Chekhov, Khan. And Montalban, he is terrific, man. On continuing to rewatch this film, he is necessary. He is one of the reasons why this film is great. He's a great villain. Now and again, he may do a bit of scene showing, but frankly, if you really watch the film closely, he does a lot of soft, subtle things. So when he gets really angry, it definitely pops, right? But he's a commanding presence. And the funny thing is, everyone jokes about his pecs. He was an older actor at this point, but no prosthetics. The man just kept himself in amazing shape. So the pecs you see are, real 100% Montalbanian pecs. So he's amazing. Now, here's the moment that goes against the continuity, because he goes up to Terrell and he's like, "You, I do not know." And he's like, "You, I never forget the face." And he calls him in some Chekhov. Now, and that's the one thing where we have to retcon and insert Chekhov into a place where he didn't exist. But, whatevs. Basically, Khan briefly recaps the Space Seed episode for all of us, of course, from his point of view. But we all remember that at the end of Space Seed, Khan wasn't in too bad a mood. He was like, "I have a world to win, a beautiful wife at my side." So the great thing about this is the fact that they based it off of a already existing Trek episode. We're wondering like what the hell happened. It's good tension, good mystery. And then Terrell says, "I don't even know Admiral Kirk," and Khan bristles. He's like, "Admiral." Chekhov kind of rebukes him a little bit, telling him that, they left him on kind of a garden world. And Khan explains that 6 months after they were left here, SETI Alpha 6 exploded, shifting the orbit of the planet. And as they're speaking, the soundtrack gets really creepy and kind of somber. It's really cool. Again, it makes the scene a little deeper than maybe it had a right to be. Chekhov's basically trying to speak to the rest of the crew that, you tried to kill him. He was your host. But Khan he doesn't give a crap. But then there's this nice moment where instead of answering Chekhov, Khan suddenly realizes that they didn't expect to find them and that they're there for another reason. And now he's like got the scent in his nose. So he lifts Chekhov completely off the ground, demonstrating, just what it's like to be a superior genetic specimen. And then, I'm sorry, this is where he doffs the rest of his kind of shawl, showing off his pecs, not earlier. But then, of course, we have this awesome, creepy earworm scene. We hear about Khan's wife, that these horrible species, took the lives of many of his people. And it's really gross. And the effects really work today. I mean, as he's holding the thing's head down with one set of pincers and pulling the little mini worms off of it, like, it's gross, man. And it's not that dated. Like, it looks like there was a real animal in there or a very good animatronic animal. And the soundtrack, again, is it's just nerve-wracking. As he's explaining the properties of the worms, the camera is sort of at waist height between Terrell and Chekhov looking up at Khan. And it's a very subtle shot, but very effective in that moment. And you're really just freaked out about them. And throws the worms in the helmets. And then we get that horrible scene where they crawl slowly towards their ear and worm in. Oh, just gross, but really amazing. And then, of course, Khan starts with the questions. So now we cut back to Earth, and we're in a shuttlecraft with Kirk and Uhura and Sulu and McCoy on the way to the Enterprise for this inspection tour. My God, what a difference from the first film. We get a brief flyby of the Enterprise with attendant music and a bit of a docking sequence. And that's it. It lasts all of like 3 minutes, whereas in the first film, when Kirk was brought out to see it, it took forever, and as geeks who haven't seen the refitted Enterprise in a brand new Star Trek movie, like, you don't mind it so much, but this is a whole different animal. Like, they're really all about story in this film, and it's correct, The little shuttle docks, and then Spock greets them. We see Scotty, who we didn't see yet. Kirk heads down to the engine room, and right before he leaves, Scotty's like, "Everything's in order, sir." And Kirk's like, "That'll be a pleasant surprise, Mr. Scott." And I mean, my God, right? Every other episode of the original series, the engines are a mess. The dilithium crystals are this, and the cooling is that. Like, the man has always been a mess down there. So I think it was a funny line to throw out in this film. It was great. There's a funny moment where Scott's looking at Kirk and Kirk's looking back at him, and he wipes a white handkerchief across one of the consoles and tucks it into his shirt, and eventually, just stops the tour cold. He's already bored with it, wants to get moving, and he's heading up on an elevator, and McCoy's like, "What about the rest of the inspection?" He's like, "Later." We get, in a very short period of time, I think what the first film tried so hard to do with the Enterprise leaving space dock. There's a rising of the Trek theme, and as the theme comes up, the running lights are switched on throughout the exterior of the ship, and the camera shows us that this is happening. And then the music reaches a kind of a plateau, and this drumming comes in, and you're in. Like, in a weird way, the director and the composer really, they've got me like, all right, let's go. I'm excited. And meanwhile, I don't even realize, like, Excited about what? They're going to leave Doc on a training mission, and somehow I'm all psyched, you know. But I think it's a testament to the director and the power of the soundtrack in this film, which I think has been, if it hasn't been remarked on enough, it needs to be, because it's an integral part of why Khan is so good. Kirk emerges on the bridge. It's a very emotional moment for him and for us. Spock's in the captain's chair, and to kind of prove to Kirk that his trainees can hack it, he asks Saavik to take the Enterprise out of space dock, which she's never done before. Kirk is visibly nervous, and there's this great line where Coy's like, "Would you like a tranquilizer?" And Kirk just nods, tensely. And it's great. I mean, it's a great Trek moment, very quickly. It's a really funny joke. Already in this film, we're getting such a deep base of character interactions between, everybody. It's so great how well they know each other. And a lot of the humor that was in the original series, The music crescendos, and we get this wonderful flourish as the ship leaves space dock. There's a great shot I like as the ship's pulling out. We get a space dock worker highlighted against the Enterprise leaving to get a sense of the scale of the ship. Just a very quick, subtle moment, right? But I like it. We now cut back to Regular One, and we see, but we don't know it yet, the Genesis torpedo, and Carol Marcus and David are kind of finishing the programming of it. They're interrupted by a message from Chekhov from Reliant telling them that Reliant's going to head back to Regular One, and the scientists are going to turn over all of the materials regarding Genesis for immediate testing. They freak out, and everyone gets in a bother. And David, of course, pushes Chekhov and says, "Who gave this order?" Chekhov says the order comes from Admiral James Kirk. Then we get a brief cut to Reliant. Chekhov tells Khan, of course, Captain Kirk will want to confirm the order. And Khan is, of course, that's his whole plan, basically. So then we cut back to the Enterprise, and we have Kirk and Saavik in the turbo lift. She stops the lift. She's still frustrated by the Kobayashi Maru test. She asks Kirk directly how he solved it. He's like, "You can ask," but he doesn't answer her. This is the second time. McCoy comes in to the turbo lift. She leaves. Then we get the announcement that there's a message coming in from Carol Marcus, and McCoy kind of chides Kirk. It never rains when it pours, and Kirk's like, as a doctor, you should know better than to reopen old wounds. So getting a little something about some past history there. So then we see the message from Marcus, and it's all garbled, and she's angry and bewildered. Why are you taking Genesis? And there's no real communication between the two. She can't really hear Kirk. Kirk can only really hear her. Doesn't know what she's talking about. And then it's terminated, and then we cut to Kirk entering Spock's quarters, and Spock's meditating, as he seems to always be doing when people come to visit Spock in his quarters. Like, he's always meditating. There's this really cool mirror above his head. It's like an endless mirror. Kirk kind of tells Spock, "Look, we got this message. We got to go to Regular One. We're the only ship in the quadrant." Of course, they're always the only ship in the quadrant. Another trope of Trek, right? So we're also given the fact that this is really a training cruise, that there's mostly trainees aboard with, a bare bones command staff. But then Spock, being his friend, says, "If I may be so bold that it was a mistake for Kirk to accept promotion, that commanding a starship is his first best destiny, that anything else is a waste of material." It's a great moment between real friends. Spock cares about him very deeply. We get the first use of the line, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one." For me, it always gets me when Spock walks up to him and he's like, "You are my superior officer, but also my friend, and I am and always shall be yours." And it's like, you bastards. It's awesome. Kirk snaps into kind of command mode, announces the mission, that he's taken over the Enterprise, gives the time. We go to Warp 5. We get a little bit of Warp special effects, which are a little different from the first film. Still cool, a little slicker. And we're off into the story. So we now cut to the Reliant. Now we fully see that Khan's crew is pretty much taking control. We don't know where the crew is at this point. They know the Enterprise's course, and so they're preparing to intercept. The second in command, or I guess Khan's first officer, named Joachim, played by an actor named Judson Scott. I only know his name because he went on to play the lead in a very brief, 5-episode sci-fi TV show called The Phoenix, which I really loved as a kid. Still think is a really interesting show. I've watched it again recently, and something there that I think is really cool. This is the first we get of Joachim kind of putting it to Khan, like, "Look, dude, I know you hate Kirk and everything, but we have a ship. It means to go where we will. And, you've won, you've beaten Kirk, you're no longer in exile. Let's just get the fuck out of here, And Khan's like, He tasks me. He's having none of it. He is Khan. He will not be denied his vengeance. So this is where we start to get the Moby Dick lines. So here's the two lines for those who are interested. Here's the Melville line from Moby Dick. Quote, "He tasks me, he heaps me. I see in him outrageous strength with an inscrutable malice sinewing it. That inscrutable thing is chiefly what I hate, and be the white whale agent or be the white whale principal, I will wreak that hate upon him." And then the second part of the quote, which is from another part of the book, "And I'll chase him round Good Hope, and round the Horn, and round the Norway Maelstrom, and round Perdition's flames before I give him up." Then obviously Khan is a combination of the two, and and they changed some of the locations to fit the movie, which I think is cool. So here's his quote in entirety. Quote, he tasks me, and I shall have him. I'll chase him round the moons of Nibia, and round the Antares Maelstrom, and round Perdition's flames before I give him up. So, and wonderfully passionate line reading by Montalban. He's awesome. I mean, you can see the struggle between him. He's got this, volcano of hate underneath, but he doesn't like losing his composure. Like Khan likes to be cool, but he's out of his mind, Even among his own people, he's just lost in this rage at Kirk. And it's well shown by Montalban and the script, really, really great. And a fitting continuation of how he was introduced in Space Seed, that his megalomania is his main Achilles heel with all of his achievements mentally and physically. Like he will not be slighted. He will have his way, man. And, Kirk besting him, he'll never get over it, ever, And it's a great classic movie villain character flaw, that, becomes his undoing eventually. So very neat. So now we get Kirk, Spock, and McCoy accessing Carol Marcus's brief on the Genesis project, which he recorded, maybe 8-9 months ago. And it's so cool, man. It's, basically nanomachines reorganizing matter. The animatics for back then were really cool. I mean, now they're ridiculously dated, but, this is what Hitchcock would call the MacGuffin in the film, the thing that people are after. But it's really amazing when they introduce a torpedo, and it's a startling bit of technology, let's put it that way. And of course, we get the little spillover now. We get the reactions from Kirk and McCoy, which are, really the metaphors of the two halves of Kirk and how he relies on for his decision-making and for so much of his personality, right? Spock is just amazing, literally life from lifelessness. McCoy is aghast at the morality of it, poses the question, well, what if life already existed? And he doesn't like Spock's emotionless answer, would destroy new life in favor of its new matrix. And McCoy's like, it's new matrix. Oh, really? And he kind of flips out. So it's great. And McCoy starts on it, you green-blooded hobgoblin thing. When the call comes in from the bridge that Reliant is closing fast and is incommunicado. So now the soundtrack cues here, and again, we're back in tension land. It does so much of the work for the film. It's really great. And, we cut to Khan, and Khan is basically gambling on Kirk's unwillingness to show hostility to another Federation craft. And, immediately we get Saavik saying, General Order 6, if communications have not been established, so on and so forth. And Spock kind of upbraids her for having the temerity to remind a admiral of Kirk's status, such a mundane regulation. But of course, she is correct, and he does acknowledge it afterwards. So he ignores her. And look, he's been out of the saddle for a while, man. He's been, as McCoy has put it, rather than being desk-bound, he should be out there hopping galaxies. That's what he says, hopping galaxies. So he's rusty. He's playing kind of an admiral's gentleman's game. Like, well, no, let's not put the shields up. Something must be wrong. And so then Khan quotes his proverb, that he attributes to the Klingons about revenge being a dish best served cold, which I looked up, and they attribute it to a Frenchman named Talleyrand, but they're not really sure that it was him. It could have been before him. So it's one of those quotes. It's kind of, its origins is lost in the mists of time, as it were. Eventually, they get a verbal message that their coil systems, Reliant saying their coil systems are overloaded, and Spock's like their coil emissions are normal. And so then Reliant raises shields and locks phasers, and Kirk tries to follow suit, but he's way too late. It's a great special effects when the Reliant attacks Enterprise, and how the phasers interact with the ship when they hit the ship and the explosions is really well done. As it's exploding inward, it really looks great. I mean, still to this day, I think it's very, very good effects, very clear what is happening. We see immediately the mayhem in engineering. And again, engineering is staffed with trainees. So there's no battle-hardened engineer staff to kind of lock shit down and give Kirk the power he needs to fight back. They all bail. And the Enterprise is insanely vulnerable. So Spock points out to Kirk on the monitors that he's like, they knew exactly where to hit us. So, Khan and his crew had done their homework in terms of engineering and ship controls and knew exactly where to hit the Enterprise. It's really cool. That's a very eerie moment for them. And Kirk's like, who knew? They come back for another pass. They hit him with a photon torpedo, and basically the Enterprise is dead in space. They're on batteries. There's enough power for maybe a few shots. And then, of course, we get the wonderful reveal. Uhura tells Kirk, Commander of Reliant, is hailing us. They want to talk terms of our surrender. And we get this wonderful Khan reveal on the screen, and Kirk's awed reaction. Khan. It was great. Khan's lines are great. Ah, you remember me. I cannot help but be touched. I, of course, remember you. So, of course, Khan, being the megalomaniac that he is, he has to let Kirk know who it was who had beaten him, and he intends to just blow the Enterprise apart on his next pass. And, of course, Kirk asks him if he'll spare his crew, if he'll personally beam aboard. So Khan agrees, but also wants, in addition to himself, the Genesis data as well. And, Kirk tries to feign that he doesn't know anything about it, and Khan's like, don't insult my intelligence, Kirk. So he gives Kirk 1 minute. So it's a great moment. It's very tense. The bridge is cleared except for the main staff. Then we have this prefix code gambit, which is awesome. Savik's involved, and we get this idea, which I love, that each Federation starship has sort of like a combination code, which prevents enemies from doing, exactly what they're trying to do. But if you know the code, you pretty much can take control of the ship and kind of tell it what to do via remote computer access, which is really cool. They figure out the code and they get ready to transmit. Kirk puts his glasses on at one moment, which I think is great because it's like the old man who's been beaten badly, he's put his glasses on. He looks very vulnerable. And he's like, damn. And I think he says that because he doesn't want Khan to see him with his glasses. But there's a great moment when Kirk's like, here it comes. And of course, Reliant shields are dropped. The Enterprise fires on them enough where they're disabled and they have to move off, and Khan is pissed. But it's great. And Savik's like, you did it, sir. And Kirk's like, I did nothing. He's like, I got caught with my britches down. I must be getting senile, which is a great moment. And he points at Savik and he's like, you go right on quoting regulations. And that's the great thing about Kirk. Like, he always admits his faults. And even in the first film, they got this right. When he doesn't know the ship or he's made mistakes, like, it's the great part about Kirk is that he's an honest guy, regardless of his command stature. This victory is short-lived. Scotty enters the bridge with Peter Preston, who we met earlier in the film, in his arms. I like that they introduced a person. We got that person introduced to us. They're dead. Because this is the beginning of Kirk just didn't make a command mistake and then got out of it by tricky means, right? There was a price. And this young trainee was one of the few who stayed at his post when everyone else ran, giving Kirk the bit of power that he needed to strike back at Khan. So it wasn't just like damn, Kirk, you're an old man, you're not what you once were. Like, yeah, and he killed this kid because of his age, and in a sense, he hasn't been at the helm of a ship in a long time. It cost lives. And I like that they state the theme, because this will happen later on with Spock, obviously, that, Kirk getting out of scrapes is no longer cost-free. And I think that's terrific. Again, it's another way of making, Trek be a world where, things are at stake. And sometimes it's very hard to do that with recurring cast members, right? No one's ever going to die, really. But you got to figure out a way to make stakes for the captain. He just can't be the guy who gets away with it every time. We're already seeing that that's not the case in this film, which I think, again, makes it the best of the Trek films. So then we get a brief shot of sickbay. McCoy brings Preston around by giving him some kind of shot, one last moment. And he's like, did we make it, Admiral? We made it. And he dies. Doohan actually has a really nice moment where he starts crying. And he's like, he stayed at his post when the other trainees ran. And it's a tough little moment, you know. And Kirk has to deal with this. He's got to face the fact that he got this kid killed. The stakes are still really high. They don't have any scanning capability. They're like really, really at a low ebb here in terms of, you know, what they can do as a ship. They continue on to Regular One, but they can't scan into the space station or scan very far to see if Reliant is around. So Kirk, McCoy, and Saavik beam onto Regular One, leaving Spock in command of the Enterprise. This is a nice sequence on Regular One because it's set with a lot of suspense, kind of horror movie-ish, in that it's very quiet and they're all walking around by themselves on this space station, you know, trying to find out what's going on. Very horror movie-ish, couple of false scares. McCoy runs into the first real scare. He backs into and then quickly turns around and some bloody hand is right in his face. So it's a good scare, actually. And then we see Kirk starting to let down these bodies of these tortured and dead scientists. And again, for the Trek universe, for there to be blood, first of all, Khan tortured and killed all these people. It's pretty harsh for Trek, which I like. You know, again, stakes. Khan is not just chewing the scenery, he's killing people. So Terrell and Chekhov have kind of, so they say, right? They've gotten away from Khan. They stowed away in a sort of container. They're alive, but they still look a little spaced out. Chekhov tells Kirk about the worms and about where they discovered Khan. Then we hear in more detail about Khan's rampage, and he cut their throats, but no one would tell him where the Genesis materials are, so he didn't get Genesis. But Genesis is not on the station either. They finish searching the station. They discover in the transporter room the last known coordinates that were used are inside of the moon that the space station is orbiting around. And we get a sense, you know, we remember back when during the briefing of Genesis, they talked about stage 2 would be conducted in a lifeless underground. So Kirk has good grounds to believe that there's a place where they beam to. Now, he calls Spock on an open channel, and they talk about repairs. And there's some kind of odd language that they're using. If you're listening closely, you get a sense that something is being discussed or tricked. In a sense, Spock's like, buy the book, Admiral. So something's going on. And we find out later, of course, how clever they were. And we also cut to Reliant and Khan, who's listening in on the open channel. So they all appear inside this cave, and we see the Genesis torpedo and its control box sort of right there. They're briefly attacked by David and some associate. Kirk and David fight briefly, and he disarms him in that great Kirk way that he has of fighting, you know, where he's quasi-martial arts, but not completely. Carol intervenes then briefly, but then Terrell announces that he and Chekhov have been working for Khan. They've been tracking them, and we realize that they're still under the influence of the worms. Of course, Khan wants Terrell to kill Kirk. You know, there's this crazy thing between commanders in, you know, the Federation where they undergo what's called command training. And command training is kind of spooky. They've used it throughout the rest of the Trek original series, that if you've had command training, you know, you can't really get information out of them. You can't brainwash them. There's this kind of this rigorous discipline that commanders undergo. And I don't know, I always thought it was kind of cool. And I always thought that that's why Khan couldn't break Terrell completely, because of command training. But Terrell can't bring himself to kill another officer. So he, at that point, I think, and I guess this is how the worms work, you know, when someone does not respond to suggestion, it agitates the worm. And Terrell then he freaks out, turns the phaser on himself, which is pretty screwed up, actually. It's kind of a creepy moment. And then Chekhov succumbs as well as the worm exits his skull and is phasered by Kirk. A really creepy little scene. I think Kirk grabs the control and is like, "Khan, you bloodsucker!" You know, and he's trying to taunt him because he realizes that, you know, he wants Khan to come down there and they can at least have a chance to, you know, to beat on him and maybe take him captive. But in that moment, Khan transports the Genesis device up to Reliant, and Khan is still like visibly shocked that Kirk is alive. Like, it's a great moment. Like, he's like, "You're still alive." Kirk taunts him like a poor marksman. You keep missing the target. And then we realize Khan, there's the supreme moment where Khan's like, "Perhaps I no longer need to try." Khan, we get these great lines about, "I shall leave you if you left me, buried alive." The immortal, if not, you know, ridiculously campy, Kirk's head starts to shake, and Khan! The camera pulls out and it just shows the moon, but we hear Khan. The great part about this that I've forgotten is the shot of Khan after he hears it, and it's like he hears Kirk screaming his name, and he's like utterly transfixed. Like it's the most pleasurable thing he's ever heard. It's like this elixir of pure pleasure. Like, yes, I've done Kirk in. He is in pain. And it's great. I don't know. It's a good moment. And again, Montalban, I think he's awesome. Now we cut back to the moon. Kirk kind of tells David and McCoy and Savick to head into the cave because he needs to talk to Carol. And they catch up. This is where I think this actress, Bibi Besh, and the character of Carol Marcus, if you've listened to my podcasts, I'm kind of intractable about cheesy female characters because enough already, right? Whatever. It's an axe that I have to grind. I grind away on it because there's no real reason that we have to have female characters be anything other than real human beings and real characters. Like, look, there are some characters in films. Not every character in a movie that's a woman has to be a strong female character, right? That's ridiculous. Same with men. Not all the male characters have to be strong male characters, but you got to even up the odds a little bit here. Marcus is awesome because she's so confident. Like, even personally, as an actress, like she measures up to Kirk, man. She stands toe to toe with Shatner in these scenes as a woman of power and gravitas, and her own, she created Genesis, man. It's great. Like, it's really great. And what's even better is that we find out that David is Kirk's son, and that Kirk's like, I stayed away like you told me. Why didn't you tell him? So Jim's a little messed up that Carol never told David that he's his father. Carol goes right back at him. She's like, what did you expect? You're running around the galaxy, never around. I wanted him in my world with me. And she's not one of Kirk's old playthings. Like, this is a real woman, man. And she doesn't sweat him, and she's not swooning. Like, she's got mad respect for Kirk as like an officer and as a man, right? But she's her own woman, man. And she's like, and there's no like, oh, Jim, why did you leave me? She's like, I wanted to raise my son in my world, not running around the galaxy like you, So it's the way I wanted it. But she realizes, she took Kirk down a peg, and Kirk is visibly shaken by all this. Like, and again, this is right within the theme of the film of Kirk aging, of, the theme of Kirk aging and of him always being able to cheat death. Like, it's all drenched in the theme. Which is great. I mean, every part of it. This too. And there's a great quote where Carol turns to Kirk. She's like, tell me what you're feeling. Because she told him in a very straightforward, non-sentimental way, right? She didn't try to hurt him, but it took him. It took him down a peg. Shatner's got a nice series of lines, which I'll quote. And he says, quote, there's a man I haven't seen in 15 years who's trying to kill me. You show me a son who'd be happy to help. My son. My life that could have been and wasn't. What am I feeling? I'm feeling old, worn out. It's kind of the statement of where Kirk has been so far in this film. He's behind a desk. He's been outmaneuvered and beat up by Khan. He's training a new crew to replace him. And now he sees a son who doesn't even know him, who's, actually trying to kill him in that one moment. Doesn't trust him, so on and so forth. And it's great. It all works in the film that Kirk is just feeling like some old coot who's the galaxy's moved on, and he hasn't moved along with it. Carol responds, let me show you something that'll make you feel like the world was young, takes him into the cave. So the special effects for the Genesis cave really don't do justice. And one thing I never really made sense to me was that there's a sun in there. And this happens at the end of the film too, where the Genesis device creates a planet and a sun. And so here she created a cave with a sun in it. I don't know. It's a little, obviously I take my science fiction pretty seriously. So it's, it's not Harry Potter to me. There's some rules, right? So it's a little odd, but whatevs. The special effects are not great. It looks very much matte painted. You don't get a lot of the grandeur of this cave, but it's a great idea. But Carol Marcus has this great line, kind of ends her involvement in the movie, frankly, but she's next to Kirk and she goes, can I cook or can't I? Like complete gravitas as a character. Love her. So we cut back to Regulus 1. Because of the conversation Kirk and Spock had on the open airwaves, Reliant expected to find Enterprise at Regular 1 fairly helpless. However, she is gone. We cut back inside the cave, and finally, we get the Kobayashi Maru explanation because Savick will not rest. So Kirk explains his solution, that he reprogrammed the machine, and David scoffs and says he cheated. And he's like, no, I changed the conditions of the test. And that was the genesis for Kirk always cheating death, right? That there's always a way out. I don't believe in a no-win scenario. And again, part of the theme, which is awesome. He has a really great moment here because when he's done telling the story, he flips over his communicator and he's like, I don't like to lose. And then you hear the communicator going, it's like, Kirk to Spock, it's been 2 hours. Are you ready? Ready, Admiral. Ready to beam you all aboard. And it's this great moment of like Kirk, the wily old fox. Like he's always got something up his sleeve. Even as this film, the costs are mounting, Kirk is irrepressible in that way too, that he will never stop trying to win. So as they beam back aboard Enterprise, we realized that the whole thing was a ruse, and it was based along regulations and some regulation number where it's like, in the event of blah, 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 no unopened communications on an uncoded channel or something like that. When Spock was responding, it's going to take 6 days to fix the Enterprise, he really meant 6 hours. When he said we could be ready in 2 days, he meant 2 hours. And it's nice, but I think it's a little too soon for Kirk to be gloating. And he does gloat a little bit in this moment, but, whatever. It's Kirk, right? That's his character. We see the tactical situation on the bridge of the Enterprise, that the Enterprise is now orbiting exactly opposite Reliant around this moon. And Spock tells Kirk about something called the Mutara Nebula, which is nearby. And we get this great line, because Saavik is like, why would we go in there? Our shields and our sensors would be useless. And Spock says, sauce for the goose. The odds will be even, since at this point, I believe Reliant is still more powerful in an open battle. Now we're on to Act 3, the final climax, battle stations. We're ramping up emotionally. And during all these sort of preparations for the final battle, we get a very specific set of shots of a photon torpedo being loaded into the bay, which is sort of a bit of a foreshadowing of, what will happen at the end of the film. But we're visually introduced to what a photon torpedo looks like before it's shot out of the ship. Enterprise heads for the nebula. Reliant spots them, sets off in pursuit. At this point, David enters the bridge. Then on Reliant, Joachim slows Reliant, unwilling to follow Enterprise into the nebula, telling Khan our shields are going to be useless. Khan kind of allows it, right? So Kirk on open channel goads him into action, and he's like, Khan, it's Kirk. You game for a rematch. And Khan's blown away that Kirk has survived, right? That he's not entombed in the moon. Kirk really gets him with, I'm laughing at your superior intellect. Khan basically orders full power, and Joachim stands up. He's like, sir, no, you have Genesis, you have this ship. Let's get out of here. And Khan's like, full power, damn you, knocks him aside. Like, it's over. Like, Khan is completely hell-bent on revenge. And unfortunately, his crew is with him to the last. So now we go into the nebula. The nebula effects, I think, are still pretty cool. They kind of reminded me a little bit of the V'ger effects. Not as expansive, obviously. Both ships head inside. This is great. I mean, this is like a naval battle in the fog, It's really cool. Blind man's bluff, basically. And, we get these shots in the nebula of both ships on different courses. Then at one point, Enterprise comes up behind Reliant and fires, missing. Khan tries a rear-facing photon torpedo, also misses. Then there's nearly a head-on collision. They fire back at each other. Each ship deals the other some damage. In that exchange, Khan's first officer, Joachim, is killed, and the bridge of the Reliant's pretty well wrecked. But we also hear that the main engines for the Enterprise are now offline because of this radiation leak, and Scotty collapses. Now we're in the end game. Chekhov enters the bridge, recovering from the worm, as it were. Takes his old place, and Spock and Kirk talk strategy, and it's kind of a cool thing where Spock says he's highly intelligent, but his maneuvers suggest two-dimensional thinking, that everything's been lateral, left and right, and back and forward, not three-dimensional. So Kirk takes the cue, and immediately they drop the Enterprise down like 1,000 meters, and we see Reliant passes over them. They rise up behind, and they disable it permanently, and with many photon torpedoes and phasers. It's great. They blow off one of the nacelles. And in this moment, the ships, this very grandeur-ish moment, the ships are really filling the screen. And you really get a sense of, it reminded me of the beginning of Abrams' Star Trek, when the ships, you don't get all of the ship in the screen, and you never get a framed shot. And it looks like they're too big to be encapsulated by the camera. And that happens here. It's really cool. And once Reliant's disabled, there's this nice shot when it's sort of off course, and where the nacelle used to be is sort of the stub, and it's sparking and glowing with like all the ends of the power cables that were attached to the nacelle, and it's really great. And it's actually still, I think, a really good effect here in good old 2015. So then on the bridge of the Reliant, Khan, mortally wounded. He looks like Two-Face. Half of his face is burned, the other half is not. He begins to activate the Genesis torpedo. And so Spock on the bridge notices an odd energy wave, and David, being on the bridge, identifies it as the Genesis wave building up to detonation. And that it cannot be. Kirk wants to beam on board and stop it. And basically David's like, it can't be reversed once it's kicked into drive. So as Kirk is dealing with this, the camera itself focuses on Spock, who comes to some kind of decision and vacates his post. And now with some cross-cutting. So we cut from Khan arming the torpedo to Spock in engineering. And basically he confronts McCoy. He's about to go into the radiation-filled chamber to fix the engines. And McCoy's like, you can't go in there, you'll die. He fakes McCoy out by agreeing with him, but of course does the Vulcan neck pinch. And then he does this moment that no one understood until, Star Trek 3 came out, where he puts his hand up against McCoy's face and says, remember, right? And it's an odd moment, and obviously he's giving McCoy his katra, I think they call it, so he can be recalled later. But anyway, he puts on this big gloves and heads in, and right when he goes in, Scotty wakes up and, screaming at him to get out of there. We see Spock making these repairs, and he's doing all right, and then he pulls off, like, some kind of cowling, and the whole thing is filled with radiation, and that's where Scotty really kind of loses it. So then we have Khan's last words, and he finishes the torpedo. He arms it to detonation. He's watching the Enterprise limp away, and he knows he can't escape. He's like, no, you can't get away. We cut back to the Enterprise, and we hear the bridge crew are very somber, and we hear Sulu, we're not going to make it, are we? And he's like, Scotty, I need main power, and he hears nothing from the engine room. And then we get Khan's last words, which are right from the end of Moby Dick. I think they're Ahab's last words. Quote, to the last I grapple with thee, from hell's heart I stab at thee, for hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee, and he dies. I mean, what a way to go, man. However, there's this great moment on the bridge where they get the mains back online, and the Enterprise, zips away just at the edge of the blast radius of the Genesis device, basically turning the Matara Nebula into a planet, and again, the sun, which is just odd. So it creates a sun and a planet. And Carol appears on deck, and the music swells, and, oh, it's a beautiful world. Look what you've done. But then it's all soured as we hear McCoy ring onto the bridge. Jim, you better get down here. It's great. He sounds really just shot. And then Kirk spins and looks at Spock's seat. It's empty. And then we get the great scene in this film. Kirk immediately sees Spock. He's like, get her out of there. He'll die. And Scotty's great line, he's dead already. Kirk looks at him and then again at McCoy. They both are like, it's over, dude. God, it's such a tear-jerking scene. I mean, make no mistake. This took place before characters in movies were continually reanimated, in the 90s and the aughts where, no one ever dies anymore. It's too expensive. The rumor in this film was that Nimoy wanted out of the franchise. He was sick of Spock. He wrote a book called I Am Not Spock, so everyone figured they're killing off Spock. Nimoy may direct, but Spock's gone from the franchise. And so this death had resonance to fans, big time. It really mattered. It's incredible to watch even after all these years. And, Kirk and Spock asks if the ship is out of danger, and Nimoy's terrific. He makes it very dignified, because there's this, he has to act in this way where the radiation has fried his senses. So, he bumps into the glass. He can't really see. He can kind of only hear Kirk. Asks if the ship is out of danger and requotes that line, the needs of the many. Oh, man. And he finally dies. Then Kirk slumps down and the camera pulls away from Kirk and he's just done. I mean, Shatner just aces it. His famous line is that the best acting he's ever done is after David dies in Star Trek 3 when he's, you Klingon bastard, killed my son. But I don't agree. I think that this moment, quiet moment on his face with the soundtrack holding this one note as the camera pulls away, some of the best stuff he's ever done. Let me cut right to the funeral. Oh, God, it's such a tearjerker as well. And I want to read the speech because I think this is a beautiful speech. And Shatner nails it. Quote, we are assembled here today to pay final respects to our honored dead. And yet it should be noted that in the midst of our sorrow, that this death takes place in the shadow of new life, the sunrise of a new world, a world that our beloved comrade gave his life to protect and nourish. He did not feel that sacrifice a vain or empty one, and we will not debate his profound wisdom at these proceedings. Of my friend, I can say only this. Of all the souls I have encountered in my travels, his was the most. And then there's a hitch in his voice, and he ends it human, And it's crazy. Savick is crying. I think there's one or two other of the main crew members are crying, and it's a hell of a scene. Although it's a very strange speech because Spock didn't give his life to protect and nourish this new world. So I'm wondering if the speech came from an earlier version of the script where Spock did give his life for a world to be saved, because he didn't give his life so the Genesis planet could be created. So it's a little anachronistic, but the emotional wave of him dying is so much that, I never give a shit. But it's very odd. So I'm just wondering if, it came from an older version of the script. Scotty plays bagpipes, which I think is a really nice touch. And then we see the torpedo, which we had followed earlier. Spock's body's in it, and it's launched at the Genesis planet. And there's a nice little visual moment when the torpedo disappears around the bend of the planet. The sun kind of comes out from the same spot. Very kind of nice. And now we cut to Kirk in his quarters. He's reading the end of Tale of Two Cities, which I always think, where the hell did he get time to read an entire Dickens novel in the space of this, movie? He just got the damn thing, right before they went on a cruise. So when was he reading it, But anyway. He notices that his reading glasses are smashed, so he can't even read. He puts the glasses down, and then David enters. We're at the summation of Kirk's journey, really, the thematic summation of it. He's sort of, I got to get back on the bridge, and then, David starts to speak, and Kirk kind of deflates and sits down again. David's like, you really never have faced death, And so I'm going to quote Kirk because this is his character kind of growing. So, quote, no, not like this. I haven't faced death. I've cheated death. I've tricked my way out of death and patted myself on the back for my ingenuity. I know nothing. And man, for Star Trek fans who have followed the series for years, that is something. To get a development of Kirk's character the thing that made him so awesome to watch on the original series is now something that he's sort of chiding himself as childish and irresponsible, that for all my trickery and everything that I've done, that I've never really learned one of the basic things in life, which is that things die and that, you do lose. And he's learned that, throughout this film. Preston died, and again, when Spock died. So it's just great. It's just it's so well done. The writing is so spot on, without overdoing it. Although there's a weird moment afterwards, Kirk kind of stings him back. He's like, is that what you came here to say? He kind of gets defensive. And then David kind of says, I'm proud to be your son. And they embrace. And they have this wonderful moment where, thematically now he moves on. And, him realizing that he has a son. His son acknowledges Kirk. There is a youthfulness now that's coming back into his spirit. And it enervates Kirk. At the end, they're all standing in front of the view screen. Kirk quotes the ending lines to A Tale of Two Cities. It's a far, far better thing I do than I've ever done. It's a far better rest that I go to than I've ever known. And of course, in 23rd century, not a lot of people know Dickens. So Carol Marcus says, what is that from? Is that a poem? He's like, no, something Spock was trying to tell me on my birthday. Beautiful summation. And then McCoy looks at him. He's like, how do you feel, Jim? He's like, I feel young. We're hitting it right on the button. Then, our last caveat, we zoom down to the Genesis planet to see that the torpedo that Spock had been entombed in fact, safe landed on the planet and is basically undamaged. So, for anyone who was hoping for Spock's resurrection, right, you were given a little bit of a breadcrumb there. And then we're out. And so ends Star Trek II Wrath of Khan. One thing that I came across when I was doing a little bit of research, I don't really do a lot of research for these podcasts. It's really more about, I'm interested more about in sharing my reactions to the films and how they made me feel and think when I saw them. Because, we have the internet if you want to look stuff up. That Montalban and Shatner, and it makes sense when you watch the film, but they were in no scenes together. Like, they didn't even meet. Khan did all of his scenes with other people, and so did Kirk. And the on-screen dialogue they had back and forth is all, like, via screen. So they never actually shot any scenes together, which I thought was interesting. And Montalban kind of regrets it. He's like, I wish I would have had some scenes with Shatner, but I didn't. So, Star Trek II, what else can I say about this film? It's a classic. its effects are getting dated year by year, but because it's so character based and it's so well written and the themes are so wonderfully explored, casting is great. I think this film will continue to still have power and effectiveness on the screen for decades to come. I've seen Star Trek Into Darkness, and I think that film will fade before Khan does. I think that's more of a confection. They play with the idea of death, and I'll definitely wind up reviewing that at some point. I think that film is kind of a pale imitation of what they achieved in Wrath of Khan, real gravitas, real themes about aging and dying and what it means, and children and the next generation. And it's a beautiful movie, and there's humor in it. There's real stakes in it. There's blood in it. Khan's a maniac. It's a great villain. I feel like we didn't get a lot of Sulu, Chekhov, and Uhura and Scotty, but we never really get a lot of them. But I think in this film really was focused on McCoy, Kirk, and Spock a lot. But, I think it really worked, the characters for all of them. I think it was such a beautiful movie. In many ways. And my favorite Trek movie still to this day. It is still number one by far, I think. I don't really think there's a close second. I think there's second, third, and the rest of them. But Khan, to me, is still head and shoulders the best of the bunch. So, I would like to dedicate this podcast to Leonard Nimoy, who passed last week, whose acting craft and whose just being in the Star Trek cast and in the films and in the TV show, he has been a part of my life, my history, and my imaginative life, which is very important to me. He has been an integral part of it. And the tribute to him really is the seriousness in which he undertook to portray his character, the care in which he took in protecting Spock and in playing Spock really well and trying to be the best Spock that he could be as an actor and not mailing it in and being party to Spock being kind of exploited and abused by writers or producers, as it were. So for that fidelity, I thank him because it means a lot. So that's it for this edition of Sci-Fi on Screen. I want to thank you all very much for listening. It was a real pleasure to cover this movie, and you can find us online at sci-fionscreen.com. We're on Facebook, iTunes. You can subscribe on iTunes, and if you have a smartphone, they're adding the smartphone apps now to a lot of new smartphones, and you can search for Sci-Fi on Screen on your smartphone and subscribe, and new episodes will pop into your phone as they are uploaded by me. Thank you again, and see you next time.